efforts.
Oh gosh, that income tax.
Yeah, it really sucks.
It's really getting ridiculous. Yeah, that's true. And now we're to Virginia for information on the most 3 influential men of the year.
Hello, and welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about the 3 most influential men of the year. In 3rd place, I would rank General George McClellan. General George McClellan was a skillful Union general. He helped reorganize forces. He graduated 2nd in his class at West Point in 1846, and then participated in the Mexican War, and after returned to West Point to teach military engineering. In 1857, he became Chief of Engineering for the Illinois Central Railroad, and in 1860, President of the Ohio and Mississippi Railroad. At the beginning of the war, he was commissioned in a regular army and earned the reputation as Young Napoleon of the West. After the Union was defeated at the First Battle of Bull Run, McClellan was put to the command of what would turn into the Potomac Army. And finally, in November, he was appointed to Commander-in-Chief of the Union Army. His strategies to defeat the Confederacy were carefully planned and brought order to chaos. That's why he was one of the most 3 influential. Next, I would rank Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis is the President of the Confederate States of America. Davis came from a large family who settled in a Mississippi plantation when he was younger. At the age of 7, he was sent to Kentucky for education, and following that school, he continued to attend Transylvania College. After he spent 4 years at the United States Military Academy at West Point and graduated in 1828, he was elected to the House of Representatives. However, a little over a year, he resigned to go serve in the war in Mexico. This was the first time he recognized for his outstanding military skills and a national hero from winning the Battle of Buena Vista in 1847. He was made Secretary of War in 1853 and used his power to enlarge the army. Shortly after the succession of Mississippi, he decided to resign from the Senate, but before he reached home, he was called to serve as military leader, soon after being labeled the President of the Confederacy in February. Davis was in a hard position, for the South lacked many resources, so many of his resources were makeshift, making the South at a slight disadvantage to the North. But without this brilliant man, how would the South have stood a chance? In first place, we have General Robert E. Lee. He's now the Confederate general, and was the 4th child of Colonel Henry Lee and Anne Hill Carter. His father, Henry Lee, also nicknamed Light Horse Harry, had been a cavalry leader during the Revolution, and he was also a post-revolutionary governor of Virginia. Henry was also the famous author of George Washington's Congressional Memorial Eulogy. Growing up, Robert lost his father at a young age, leaving his mother widowed with a very poor financial support. He graduated 2nd in his class and won appointment to Quartz Adjutant, which is the highest rank a cadet could receive at West Point. In April, he was called to Washington and asked to help the military in invasion to force some of the seceded states back into the Union. He thoughtfully resigned due to his disbelief in war. Although Lee believed strongly in the Union, he felt the need to return home to Virginia and defend his homeland from invasion. General Robert E. Lee was one of the first to realize this war had no near end, and that no side would be suppressed easily. Today we welcome General Robert E. Lee. He was the most influential man of the year, according to us, and today he's here over the phone so we can ask him some questions. How did losing your father at a young age affect your life?
It was hard on my mother, for she was left widowed with us 7 children. She dealt with it remarkably well, better than anyone could imagine. I admire her for her strength, and I will always see her as my role model. After my father died, we had little money, and that was a struggle for us, but we made it through the hard times, staying together as a family. I could not afford a good education, but thankfully I was admitted to West Point, which was the beginning of my military career. It definitely was a large obstacle in my life, but I learned to be strong from a young age, and I was determined to do something with my life.
Why did you refuse when you were asked to join the Union forces in order to help force the seceded states back into the Union?
I do not support secession. However, I also oppose a war.
Well, if you did not support secession, then why did you return to Virginia and become a leader of their forces?
Virginia is my home. It was where I was born and raised. I had to support my homeland. I had been familiar with Virginia my whole life, but the Union and Confederacy were new to me. And of course, I would choose the option that I was more comfortable with.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, that was interesting.
Yeah, now let's go to our political analyst Artie Patel for her insight.
On November 8th of 1861, commanded by Captain Charles Wilkes, the USS San Jacinto intercepted a British mail package. 2 Confederate diplomats, John Mason and John Slidell, were captured. They had been on their way to Britain to press for diplomatic recognition and material aid in Europe from the British. For this, the United States wanted to rally against Britain. However, the President and his advisors did not want to take the risk of war. The Confederate States wanted to permanently ruin Anglo-American relations. They understood that their independence depended on the war between Britain and the United States. The British public was outraged at this because they believed that their national honor was being insulted and their neutral rights were violated. Britain demanded for an apology and then asked for the return of their prisoners and began to strengthen their army in preparation for war. After a few weeks, the Lincoln administration released the envoys. However, they later failed in their goal for diplomatic recognition and no formal apology was issued by the United States.
Thank you, Artie, for your insight. Coming up after the break, we will hear from our sociocultural expert, Sarah.
And now for a message brought to you by the Union. The United States government has just passed the Confiscation Act, which means that the Union now has the right to confiscate any Confederate property, including slaves. Also, under the Confiscation Act, all slaves who had worked for the Confederate forces no longer have any obligations to their masters. With this law, the Union now has a way to liberate slaves still oppressed in the United States.
Clara Barton, a Civil War nurse who founded the American Red Cross, delivered aid to North and South soldiers. Barton grew up in central Massachusetts and showed her natural abilities in nursing when her brother became sick and she administered all of his treatments. She first worked as a teacher and founded the first free public New Jersey school, but then later got fired because a man wanted to take Barton's place. Barton started her efforts in the war after the Battle of Bull Run, when she recognized the unpreparedness of the Army Medical Department. Barton went around the battlefield helping to treat wounded soldiers on both sides of the war. Barton once recalls helping a wounded soldier drink water when she then realized he died by a bullet that went through her sleeve. She said, "A bullet passed between my body and the right arm, which supported him, cutting through the sleeve and passing through his chest from shoulder to shoulder. There was no more to be done for him, and I left him to rest. I have never mended that hole in my sleeve. I wonder if a soldier ever does mend a bullet in his coat." Clara Barton continued to help throughout the war as she followed armies with her wagon, going at all hours of the night to catch up with them in order to be prepared to help. She helped assist surgeons while also reporting to the battlefield to retrieve soldiers. After the war, she took a trip to Europe in order to recover from the war. She then went back to America in order to establish the Red Cross. The U.S. was reluctant to recognize the Red Cross, hoping that they would never have to ever engage in another war to that extreme. But then Barton persuaded them to recognize it under aid for natural disasters. Clara Barton never married. She continued working for the American Red Cross until her 70s. When she had resigned as president due to political feuding, Clara Barton will always be remembered by her work and interest in helping the wounded. Barton was one of many women who helped in the war effort. Women volunteered in brigades and worked as nurses. The women in the North organized supplies for everything that the men needed, such as clothing, food, and blankets. The women were also collecting supplies in order to prevent diseases that would infect the army. Many women wanted to go to the front line like Barton in order to help the wounded on the battlefield. Other women worked as laundresses and cooks. The women were looked to give motherly support. The women of the Confederacy did many of the same that the women did in the Union, but lacked in supplies and money, which caused a lot of problems. A lot of women had to make makeshift hospitals and treated the soldiers in their own homes. The wealthy women in the South often depended on their slaves to do much of their work, though.
Well, that wraps up our year in review. Hopefully next year will be better. Now back to the station for our countdown.
And this concludes the year in review, 1861.
Well, that was an interesting year.
I hope next year's better.
Well, that's all we have time for today.
I'm Artie.
And I'm Melissa, and we both wish you a Happy New Year.